My name is Janice B. Gordon, and this is Scale Your Sales Podcast. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, listed number 9 of 43 podcasts for every sales professional. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, awarded RevTech strategist of 2024. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales Podcast, my guest talks about how you wouldn't use a Nokia today to make a phone call. And this is what we're using in order to recruit top salespeople that we expect to return probably $1 million, $2 million a year in revenue. He says to recruit top talent, you must first change how you interview, moving away from competency-based questions, he says, which only show you how well they've rehearsed the pitch. Now, he's more interested in exploring diagnostic skills, which is why he leaves 75% of the interview for the candidate to ask him questions. Really interesting. My next guest's career spans 3 separate pillars, from political researcher, then EdTech space recruiting for universities, and more recently having had the senior sales position at Gartner for sales leaders, helping countless companies make successful change in their GTM models. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, Orrin Thomas. It's great to have you on the podcast, Orrin. Now, I really want to kind of get into your career because it's absolutely fascinating, the arc of your career. You've gone from political research to EdTech into sales leadership at Gartner. So I'm really curious, what are the lessons or perspective that, from your earlier roles that has helped you and influenced the way you lead and the way you enable your team now?
Wow. So I think for me, I'm a political scientist by background. I spent my time at university studying politics and looking at counterterrorism. So a big part of what I spent my education doing is looking at the research and asking really critical questions to look at things from a new perspective. And when I look at my career, that kind of rare 3% of salespeople who are just absolutely outstanding are the ones who are able to make clients view things in an entirely different way. They're the salespeople who have high ACV, they're the people who have low churn, because they're always able to help the client understand how business critical their product is and to teach the client about business problems. Those are the salespeople that I have found that the most important. In addition to doing political research, I also briefly was a teacher in an inner city school in France where I taught English, and that taught me a huge amount about the importance of teaching people things and how we can give people new skills, but also really importantly for our clients, teach them to look at their business problems in a new way. Our clients have a huge amount of complexity when they're buying something. They've got huge amounts of stakeholders in their own company involved. They've got a huge amount of vendors. And today, like as salespeople, we're competing with ChatGPT for a compelling conversation. So people who can go in and help clients and teach them something new about their business problem, help them view it in a different way. They're the ones that really I think are really winning. Where I've maybe had to really learn to step back a bit as a sales leader, especially in the last couple of years, where I've had a really high performing sales team, is as a sales leader, it's not about me doing it on your behalf as a salesperson. It's about me asking you really critical, good questions to help you think about your deals in a really different way. I'm a massive fan of Adam Grant and his whole philosophy about think again. How can we help people think about things more critically and objectively? So for me as a leader, it's about the power of questions, both the questions I ask my clients and helping them think about their business problems, but also the questions I'll ask my reps to help them think about their deals in different ways.
And it's interesting when you say about stepping back, it feels like what you would do directly with your clients, you're actually now doing directly with your team as well, in the open, strategic, searching questions that gets them to think.
Yeah, I think it's that. And it's not just about the coaching of salespeople, it's also about how we recruit differently. And we can touch on that perhaps a bit later on. But the power of asking really good questions is, I think, a really underestimated skill that we don't always look for during sales recruitment. And I think sales recruitment at the moment is quite broken and not fit for the age of AI. But yeah, I think those are really important points.
So you talked about recruitment, and we will go on to that. But you also kind of mentioned about questioning. But
Mm.
what about the kind of listening, the other side of that? Talk to me more about that.
So, and I'm going to say, I'm a shock horror. I'm an extrovert. I'm an expressive extrovert, like a very large amount of people who choose a career in sales. And I've had to learn throughout the years, and I'm still on that learning curve, that a good client interaction is about mostly the client speaking and me listening. And I think that's because traditionally, what we train salespeople to do, we do train them in diagnosis, but we mostly train them in our products. I was speaking with a sales leader friend at an EdTech firm, and we're looking at his sales enablement program. And I was like, yeah, but 90% of it is about your product. 10% of it is not about asking good questions. It's not about really trying to get into the client's head. So I think it's about having that self-awareness of ourselves. If we look at any of the big studies from sales conversational platforms today, be it SalesLoft, be it Gong, what we can hear over and over again is that a good sales call is a client speaking more and you speaking less. So for me, that means that the expressive people like me, the extroverts that we tend to find in sales, aren't necessarily always the most gifted for that type of skill. Um, and that means that we have to recruit quite differently. It means we have to look for different types of skills. But it's also a really big question about how do we unwed our own biases as extroverts, as expressives, that perhaps our personality profile, although it has its benefits, isn't always the strongest for what clients want, and clients want to speak about their problems and their issues.
Really interesting points, and I've spoken to you about the OMG research, which is sales specific research, and it's been going on for over 30 years. So we've managed to kind of like go in and really dig into what a great salesperson is for all sectors and all markets. And if I remember correctly, I spoke about this, and it was like 300, I've got the number in my head, 375% percentage difference that someone that has active listening skills, this is how important it is. And you've mentioned Gone and all of that. It comes out in their research, but we've got, the number. If you have someone that has active listening skills, then the percentage of deals that actually go through it, and they measure it in like the customer needs to speak 70% of the time and the rep 30% of the time. It's such an important data point. And then the other interesting point that you made, that many extrovert by nature people go into sales, and then you've had to learn to hone a lot of that, pull a lot of that back, recognizing that isn't necessarily the best attribute for sales. And we're going to go on to talk about recruiting. So we often recruit in our own what we feel comfortable with. So
Yeah.
more people are attracted to the industry, more people are recruited into the industry, but actually their natural tendencies are not the right ones for modern sales. So I think that's quite an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think it's been really in vogue, I think, for us to think about over the last kind of 5 to 6 years. We think about inclusion as being a soft philosophical concept. But when I was able to kind of step back and understand that there are real strengths in an introversion in an introverted person's personality profile, and that actually those often correlated to higher ACV, lower velocity, lower churn rate deals, because those people tend to ask more critical questions. They tend to really understand what the client's looking for and absorb that information, are able to play it back. That's it's a skill. It can be learned like anything, but introverts tend to have more of a natural tendency towards it. So the question I then had to ask myself is, if that's really important, does a competency-based interview where I sit there and ask you lots of questions, which your average sales rep these days has rehearsed on ChatGPT to the point that it sounds incredibly scripted, when salespeople already are really, really good at interviewing generally anyway, um, me doing that competency-based interview for an hour, asking you, tell me about a time you've built pipeline, tell me about your biggest deal you've closed. All I'm really hearing is a performance and not actually how you do with it. So what I do in my first stage interviews, which shocks people, is I don't ask questions. I ask three competency-based questions, and then I hand it over to them. And I'm looking to see, do you lead with a hypothesis? Have you researched me? Have you researched the business? Have you researched the industry? Do you have intelligent questions to ask me? Have you done your research? Because all of those things we know from research, we know from conversational intelligence today are really important for salespeople. What we tend to really put a big emphasis on, though, in sales recruitment is, can you close? Can you ask the difficult questions about what the next steps are? All those things are great, but whether a client buys or not with you at the end of a sales process isn't because you've asked for next steps and you've asked, when can I send you the DocuSign? Because actually, I've already spent the commission money on it. That's not going to get the deal over the line. What gets a deal over the line is the really sharp diagnosis you did in your first couple of sales calls. So that's what I'm really testing for in that process. I do consistently see that introverts do better in that, and they then by definition do better once they're onboarded. So that for me has been a shift that I've made in that.
It's fascinating. I find this really fascinating. So you don't warn them of this. You ask your three competency-based questions, and then it's over to them. Do I get that right?
Well, it's not a state secret anymore, so I'm talking to you about it.
The whole world listens to this podcast. Thank you. So I know I'm rated highly, but not that highly.
But if you're doing your research and you're interviewing for a company that I work for, then you should have come across this podcast and therefore should be prepared for that process. And 9 times out of 10, people are not ready for that process.
Okay, so they're not ready for that process. Is there a possibility? I mean, I really get that this is interesting and tests real world sales skills, problem solving, thinking on your feet. Yeah. That's exactly what we're looking for. However, by not warning the client, do you worry that it might throw the good people off their game? Because we're all uniquely different. We have a certain expectation, and not everyone's going to be forewarned that you're that type of interviewer. So could people could still slip through the net by this method? Does that concern you?
So it is disarming, and I understand that, and people aren't prepared for it. So the way I framed it is, listen, you're here talking to me today because we think you're a great candidate. You, of course, will be speaking with other companies. The reason I do this is to make sure that you have the space today to qualify this job for yourself, and whether you think this company is going to be a fit for you and whether working with me is going to be a fit for you. So that's the purpose behind why I'm going to give you 45 minutes to ask questions that you want to ask. And I do think that's important because there are a lot of jobs out there that I think are missold. So I want people to, if they're going to engage with the process with us, I want them to be able to engage with it knowing that this is a job they feasibly want to do. So I'm not completely slithering and mean about it. I don't just kind of sit there stony faced. I do explain the purpose of it.
With your arms folded.
Yeah, my arms folded.
Face.
Impress me. But yeah, it's to give people the space to ask those questions.
Yeah.
What I would say is that the mature sales reps, the ones who are really good at their craft, even if they weren't expecting it, they absolutely love it and ask me a million questions and really make sure they're getting the information they need to see if it's the opportunity for them. And for me as a sales leader, I get to see live how you deal with a difficult situation. I get to see live how do you diagnose and ask questions, how do you build rapport, how do you shine executive presence in the interview. I get to see it live rather than you telling me about it.
Yeah, I love it. In scale data informed process, and I know I've spoken to you about this before, and the OMG stats, which I absolutely love because it's the only sales specific stats that I trust. It's verified and it's predictive, and it shows that when hiring based on diagnosis strengths rather than presentation skills that you've talked about, 92% of the reps hit the top half of sales teams. So this is exactly what you're looking for as well. So I'm curious because we use the predictive and verified data that the 21 core competencies, and to varying degrees depending on your market and whether it's hunter or farmer type role,
Sure.
that we can identify if this person's going to be successful on the job in your market before you hire them and before you interview them. They're either recommended or not. So I'm interested, you're using a diagnostic method, and what are the things that tell you that this person is going to be a top performer? What are the things you're looking for?
Wow. If you talk about hunters farmers, that there are some nuances. So what I look for is process orientation. Now there are two salespeople, and they'll probably know who they are when they hear this, who in their interviews just pulled up their spreadsheets and their campaigns, showed me their campaigns, showed me these really intricate spreadsheets they've used. Now, not everybody wants to use a spreadsheet, but they have a process and they can stick to it. That's something that's really, really important, process orientation, because we default to our systems, not to our desires. It's what the system we put in place is just going to predict that. So that shows discipline. The next thing I'm probably looking for is the ability to stick through things that are difficult. So I'm interested in people who've done things like learning musical instruments, learning languages. There's one guy a couple of years ago I met who had taught himself to play the ukulele. That shows discipline and methodical thinking. Because if you're going to do that, if you're going to show up every day and practice the piano for an hour, you're probably also the kind of person who's going to show up at 7 o'clock in the morning and do some cold calls. You're going to have that toughness about you. And I think that's really, really important. The other thing I look for is people who love learning. And that sounds quite trite, but I'm 15 years into sales now, and I can't read enough about sales. I can't absorb enough about it. I'm fascinated by the topic because sales changes every single year and it changes hugely. And I'm always wanting to learn and update those things. So a question I will ask people is, what newspapers do you read? What books do you read? And the reason that's even more important is because when you're going in to speak to the C-suite in large organizations, they're listening to Bloomberg. They're reading the FT. They're reading The Economist. They're worried about what's happening in the macroeconomic world. They're worried about big political trends. And if you as a salesperson don't at least understand those things, how are you going to connect with them? So those are things that I'm really, really looking for as well. I've also hired people before with no sales experience. I've hired ex-lawyers, people who have not carried quotas before, but have all of those right behaviors and being diligent, being methodical, being organized, being ready to learn. And that for me, I think is a really inclusive message that great salespeople aren't born, they're made. We can all become great salespeople if we do the right things. So that's what I'm always trying to look for people beyond logos and how many winners circles or presidents clubs you've hit. It's the traits that I see throughout the interview process. So setting next steps, doing emails where you send me a hypothesis before the call, your follow-ups afterwards, asking intelligent questions as a follow-up. As the process goes along, trying to close me and understand perhaps how favored you are as a candidate. All of those things are what I'm looking for during that recruitment process.
Fantastic. Love it. Love it. There's another area I wanted to talk about that you mentioned in terms of introverts and extroverts and how that influences the type of salesperson you're going to be and how successful you are. And this is another kind of OMG data point in that if they've looked at their entire database, which is over towards 3 million sales assessments, and it's global as well. So the top 5% of the most successful salespeople are, and there's about 84% of them are introverts rather than extroverts. And the bottom 10% of the worst salespeople in the world, I think you know where I'm going with this one, 62% of them are extroverts. And so it's really quite stark. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a bell curve in the middle, but, quite clearly, introverts tend to be the better sales people. So given that what we discussed earlier, that perhaps a good 60, 70% of people in sales, rough estimate, are extroverts.
Yeah,
And we know that the better salespeople are introverts, and your experience of having to hone yourself back.
sure.
What would you say to a sales leader in a similar position that doesn't know about, hasn't recognized the research and are still recruiting in their own image? What would you say to them?
So that way of hiring is from the 1990s. And my last question would be, when is the last time you've used your Nokia 3210E? Probably maybe around the same time you've used a fax machine, probably around the same time you've used a payphone, probably around the same time you've used MSN Messenger. Let's use 21st century tools for things in the 21st century. So for me, it's important that we're trying to modernize process. And I think that there is a tendency, I think, with sales leaders to go with gut and to go with intuition. Um, do we go with gut and intuition when we forecast, or do we go with data? We go with data and we're precise. And I think we have to do the same thing in hiring. There's very few other things in organizations that we would do in such an unstructured way as recruitment. So let's also make sure we do this. So, for example, when I do recruit people, before the interview, I put half an hour afterwards, before the interview, 15 minutes after the interview, so I can read the CV and really understand the person's background. 50 minutes afterwards to type up my notes whilst it's still fresh. We tend to treat recruitment as if it was some sort of horrible admin task like CRM admin that we do for 10 minutes on a Friday, and it's not. When we're recruiting people, these are the people themselves, they're the ones who are going to make us money. So are we really giving it our full attention and treating it seriously?
Yeah, yeah, I get that. And we have it's I can understand why people do that,
Yeah,
because it is such a labor intensive
sure,
process that doesn't give you the guaranteed results at the end of it. And
sure,
if you do the analysis, how much time you spend reading CVs, but CVs have a predictive validity of 20%, and that's whether
sure.
people have been referred in, all of the methods that we're using, as you say, are the Nokia methods, really, and they're really a blunt tool, gut
Yeah,
feeling, all of those things. Well, if we've only got on average effective predictability of 20%, but we're actually then spending a lot of time on these things that are pretty poor tools. And then we're basing our interview questions. And unlike you, most people are doing, competency-based behavioral questions. They may not ask the same, different people the same questions, so they can't
sure.
really compare and contrast the answers, all of that. If you think, then what is that, 10 hours per person that you may take to interview? That is an awful lot of time. Sales leaders do not have that time, and that's why they tend to go for all of the shortcuts. And in the system it's already embedded that they're going to fail, but then when you shortcut it as well, then it's very difficult to make a good sales hire, which is why I'm constantly talking about a sales assessment before
Yeah,
you interview. And then instead of having 20 people you interview, you've got 5 recommended or 4 recommended, but you then have interview notes as to what things you need to ask them, along with your own standard diagnostic questions. Instead of spending, on those 10 people 10 hours, you have now
yeah,
spent on the 4 people 4
yeah,
hours.
yeah.
And
No,
that's
and no, hugely. And Janet, that's why your tools really helped me. The
yeah.
market's awash with great talent.
Ugh.
Fantastic talent, people who've done amazing things, great skill sets. Um, Now, my talent acquisition team, they've only got so much time for me. They're also in a different time zone, so I don't get to talk to them to around the afternoon in the UK. And that's where the tools really helped me, because I have that pre-intelligence of who it is that I want to invest that level of time in. What we have to remember is when we're recruiting someone, we're not just recruiting a sales rep. You're recruiting someone who's going to make you 1 million, 2 million. This person's a revenue generating machine. Are you giving an approximate amount of time to that person, to the value that you're expecting to add to your organization when they start?
I think that's a brilliant point. Do you know the other area where companies fail is on the onboarding? They might do a week or two,
Uh,
but they don't do 9 months, a year. That, like of really investing in that person. What a perfect point in if you've got it, if you're expecting them to give
yeah,
you 2 million a year, then isn't it worth that time? If you've got the often you recruit the right person, but because the onboarding is so bad, their expectation is, well, you did really well in your previous role. Now I've changed your systems, I've changed your customer base, I've changed your environment. I'm expecting you to have 1 week hand holding and you're going to do really well in this environment. How can
cool.
that work?
Look, I mean, I was really, really lucky at the companies I've worked at. One company specifically where I had very in-depth sales training to the point of like it was led by actors. Some of the role plays we did, it was to that level of precision. And as much as at the time I found it really pedantic, every now and then, this is years on, those tips resurface and come back to me. And I think that lots of organizations don't invest in that anymore because the average tenure in a sales organization has gone massively down. So from an OpEx perspective, it doesn't make sense to invest $300,000, $200,000 in training a salesperson when that salesperson is only going to stay for 18 months. So I think there's a lack of sustainability in the system, not just in recruitment, but also in how we onboard sales reps as well. And there are tools out there that I think really help us down, like yours, that I think
Mm.
really help us add some precision and some science into it. Um,
That's it's really interesting that the it seems a little arse about face, so we're not going to invest in you because we don't expect you to be here for very long. The tenure of a sales leader or rep is 18 months to 2 years. Well, hang on a moment. If you invested in that good person, recognized as a good person, and they were there. I mean, it's almost like onboarding a new client. In the first year, you're not going to make any money, but you've got to have that lifetime value in order to really make money out of that client relationship. Surely it's the same with the salesperson as well.
Indeed.
So if you've got the right person and you're investing in them in the
So
first year in order to keep them in role and they're there for 5 years, well, that's when you're really getting your return on investment.
most certainly. Yeah, most certainly. I mean, I remember mine was face to face. We were flown to Washington, D.C. for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an amazing time of my life. Goodness, it was great. But I don't think many organizations are doing that quite in the same way. And I do understand that from an ESG perspective as well. There are smarter ways to do things. But do we really try to continually help salespeople sharpen their saw
Mm.
and get
Yeah.
better, especially in an environment where we're perhaps not always working in an office 5 days a week, and people don't have those moments where they get to hear, oh, look how Janice did that pricing objection. Look
Mm.
how John sold a multi-year. Look how Nathan pushed for next steps. We don't get that anymore in quite the same way, especially with younger sales SDRs who are coming through the system. So I think it's more critical for us to really think about how we enable and train salespeople.
Yeah, and as you say, we actually do have the tools now, don't we, that we didn't
Yes,
have even 10 years ago. And it's about really ensuring that your enablement is solid and all of the tools that you have, you're able to capture all of that information and share it as well. All right, we've talked a lot about this, really interesting. And I think so many of the elements that you've talked about has kind of led round to your career, really, in
sure.
the research that you do, always learning and being fascinated by sales and putting that back into the sales and your team. I've seen that element come through again and again, and also not following the road, going on the road less traveled, really, and doing things in your way that work rather than just continually following your gut and making the mistakes. So I absolutely love that. You're a perfect example to us all, Orrin.
I'm not sure about that, but thank you.
Right. Okay. What advice would you give a CEO, founder, sales leader creating a roadmap for revenue success going forward into 2026, 27?
I can't stress this enough. And I was saying the same thing at Gartner 7 years ago. Map the customer buying journey. Stop trying to get your customer to fit into your sales process. And the advantages of mapping the sales interactions to how the customer buys leads to much better forecasting, which leads to you not losing credibility with your VC or your PE partners when you forecast that you're going to close 20 million and then actually close 500K, because your salespeople are then benchmarking where they can put their opportunities or where they should be in the pipeline based upon what customers are actually doing, rather than what you think a sell. So you're basing the forecast on what the customer is doing to move the deal forward, not just based upon a seller giving you hopium.
Opium. That's a lovely
We've
word.
all done it. We've all done it, and it's not my phrase, but we've all done it. But I think map your customer buying journey, I think, is a really, really key and important one.
I think it's such a valuable perspective. Most organizations struggle to turn those kind of customer journeys and conversations into something that's really actionable. So how do you systemize this, like through the kind of feedback loops or whatever you might do to consistently shape the sales and sales enablement, rather than it being the kind of day-to-day business? What actions do you put in place to make it systemized?
Yes, I think what's really important to make it systemized from our perspective is, okay, so you've got your CRM stages. How does that live every day in your sales org? How does it live in deal reviews? How does it live in your sales training? So the three things shouldn't be completely separate from each other.
Love it. Love it. All right. Okay. So what's one personal value or belief that has shaped your approach to leadership and professional success?
Great sellers and leaders are made, not born.
Are made, not born.
They're made, not born.
Interesting.
I think that's very important.
Yeah. And I think it still kind of speaks to your kind of always learning and being curious and being able to change up what you do. You're continually evolving yourself and how you work with other people, whether it's customers or your team.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. All right. How can listeners get hold of you, Orrin?
You LinkedIn me. That's always the quickest and the easiest way to get hold of me. And also, I think my email's also connected to LinkedIn as well. So always feel free to get hold of me via those two channels.
Excellent. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Orrin. I know I've been chasing you for a number of years, but you haven't disappointed me. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for sharing all your insights and experience, Orrin Thomas.
Thank you, Janice.
If you enjoy this episode of Scale Your Sales podcast, explore other episodes of insightful guest conversations or watch the caption show on YouTube. Remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode filled with strategies to help you scale your sales. I love to hear your thoughts, so please share your views and leave a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more revenue generators just like you. So until next time, keep scaling your sales.